The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Mariah Dixon stumbled along the dusty trail, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other gripping a tattered leather satchel containing everything she owned in this world. Her once fine blue dress, now faded and torn at the hem, had seen better days just like its wearer. At 22, Mariah had lived enough heartache for 3 lifetimes, and the child growing inside her was both her greatest blessing and her heaviest burden. It was 1878 in the unforgiving Arizona Territory, and she was alone, hungry and running out of hope. The small mining town of Copper Creek loomed ahead, its ramshackle buildings silhouetted against the darkening sky. Mariah had heard rumors of work there, perhaps as a laundress or a cook's helper. Anything to get her off the road before her baby arrived. The pain struck suddenly, a sharp cramp that made her double over. Not yet, she silently pleaded. Not here, not now. She wasn't due for another month at least. As the pain subsided, Mariah straightened, took a deep breath, and continued her slow journey toward town. The first building she encountered was a stable, the warm glow of a lantern spilling from its open doors. The smell of hay and horses was oddly comforting after miles of dust and desperation. Mariah hesitated at the entrance, gathering her courage. "Hello," she called, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Is anyone there?" A tall figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the lantern light. A man with broad shoulders and a well-worn hat pulled low over his eyes. He stopped abruptly when he saw her. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat slightly. His voice was deep but gentle, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from these parts originally. "You look like you could use some help." Mariah swayed on her feet, exhaustion finally overcoming her determination. I need work, and a place to stay." The man stepped closer, and in the lamplight she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His stubbled jaw tensed as he took in her condition. "The name's Yates," he said. "Yates Holloway. I work these stables." Before Mariah could respond, another pain gripped her stronger than the last. She gasped, clutching at her belly. Yates moved quickly, reaching her just as her knees buckled. His strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Whoa there," he said softly. "I've got you." "The baby," Mariah whispered, fear evident in her voice. "It's too early." Yates glanced down at her swollen middle, then back to her pale face. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. "Doc Miller's just down the street," he said, already moving. "Hold on tight." Mariah had no choice but to wrap her arms around this stranger's neck, breathing in the scent of leather, hay, and honest sweat as he carried her toward help. She didn't know it then, but this chance encounter at the edge of a dusty frontier town would change both their lives forever. Dr. Miller's office was little more than a converted storefront with a small sign in the window, but it was clean and well organized. The doctor himself was an older man with kind eyes and a bushy white beard. "False labor," he pronounced after examining Mariah. "Common in the final months, especially after strenuous activity like walking miles in this heat." He gave her a stern look. "Young lady, you need rest, good food, and to stay off your feet as much as possible." "I can't afford," Mariah began. "She'll be staying at Mrs. Parker's boarding house," Yates interrupted, standing awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. "And I'll cover the cost until she's settled." Mariah turned to stare at him. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Yates shifted uncomfortably. "My ma always said helping folks in need is just what decent people do." He shrugged as if embarrassed by his own kindness. "Besides, Mrs. Parker owes me a favor." Later that evening, after Yates had escorted her to the boarding house, and made arrangements with the stern but fair-minded widow Parker, Mariah sat on the edge of a real bed for the first time in weeks. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. She could hardly believe the turn her fortune had taken. "Thank you," she'd told Yates as he'd prepared to leave. "I don't know how I'll repay you." "Get some rest," he'd replied, avoiding her eyes. "We can talk about the rest tomorrow." Now alone, Mariah unpacked her meager belongings and allowed herself to hope just a little that perhaps Copper Creek could be a place of new beginnings. Morning came with the sound of the town waking up, horses clopping down the street, merchants opening their shops, the distant clang of metal from the blacksmith's forge. Mariah dressed carefully in her second dress, slightly less worn than the one she'd arrived in, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Parker, a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, was serving breakfast to her boarders, 3 miners and a clerk from the assayer's office. "There she is," Mrs. Parker announced. "Sit down, girl. You're eating for 2, and you look like you haven't had a proper meal in months." Mariah slid into an empty chair, acutely aware of the curious glances from the other boarders. The plate Mrs. Parker set before her was piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy. The sight made her stomach growl audibly. "Thank you," she murmured, fighting the urge to wolf it down. "Yates stopped by earlier," Mrs. Parker said, refilling coffee cups around the table. "Said he'd come back at noon to see how you're settling in." Mariah nodded, wondering again at the cowboy's kindness. In her experience, men rarely helped without expecting something in return. She pushed the thought away, unwilling to darken this moment of reprieve with cynicism. After breakfast, Mrs. Parker put her to work folding laundry, a task she could do sitting down. "I don't take charity cases," the older woman explained, "but I can always use an extra pair of hands around here." By noon, Mariah had earned her keep and then some. When Yates arrived, hat in hand, Mrs. Parker directed him to the small parlor where Mariah was resting. "You look better today," he said, standing awkwardly just inside the doorway. In the daylight, Mariah could see him more clearly, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His clothes were well worn but clean, and there was something in his steady gaze that spoke of dependability. "I feel better," she admitted. "Thank you again for your help." Yates shifted his weight. "I spoke with Mr. Henderson at the general store. He needs someone to help with inventory and minding the counter when he's making deliveries. Told him you might be interested." Mariah straightened. "You found me work." "Nothing too strenuous," Yates assured her quickly. "Mostly sitting at the counter. Pays $2 a week, plus he'll throw in some store credit." It wasn't much, but it was more than Mariah had dared hope for. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take it," Yates replied with a small smile, "and maybe that you'll let me walk you over there to meet him." That afternoon marked the beginning of Mariah's new life in Copper Creek. Mr. Henderson was a fair employer, and the work was indeed light enough that her condition didn't hinder her. The customers were mostly curious rather than judgmental about the pregnant newcomer, and Mariah found herself settling into a routine that, if not perfect, was far better than the desperation that had driven her to this town. Yates became a regular visitor to the store, stopping by on various pretexts, needing nails, sugar, tobacco, though he never seemed to use much of what he purchased. Mariah found herself looking forward to his visits, his quiet presence a comfort in her uncertain world. A week into her employment, as Mariah was closing up shop, Yates appeared with his horse, a handsome buckskin gelding. "Thought you might like to see a bit more of the town than just the route between Mrs. Parker's and the store," he suggested. "Could walk alongside while you ride Caesar here. He's gentle as a lamb." Mariah hesitated, one hand absently stroking her belly. "I've never ridden before." Yates looked surprised. "Never," she shook her head. "I grew up in Chicago, not much call for horsemanship there." Something flickered across Yates's face, curiosity, perhaps, about her past, but he didn't pry. "Well, Caesar here will be an easy first teacher when you're ready. For now, how about just a walk? Doctor said some light exercise would be good for you." The evening was mild, the worst of the day's heat dissipating as the sun lowered in the sky. They walked slowly along the town's main street, Yates pointing out buildings of interest: the small schoolhouse, the marshal's office, the saloon, which he noted with a wry smile that she should probably avoid, and finally, the small church at the edge of town. "Sunday services at 10, he said. "Reverend Walsh doesn't preach too long and the singing's not half bad." Mariah looked at the modest white building with its small steeple. "Are you a religious man, Mr. Holloway?" "Yates," he corrected gently. "And I reckon I believe in something bigger than us. Don't make it to services as often as my ma would like, but I try." He glanced at her sideways. "You're welcome to come if you'd like company." The invitation hung in the air between them, not just to church, but to something more. Friendship, perhaps. Mariah had been alone for so long that the prospect was both tempting and terrifying. "I'd like that," she found herself saying. As they turned back toward town, Mariah gathered her courage. "Why are you being so kind to me, Yates? You don't know anything about me." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Everyone deserves a second chance, or a third." He met her eyes. "Whatever you're running from, it doesn't matter here. Copper Creek's a place where folks can start over." "Is that what you did?" Mariah asked softly. A shadow crossed his face. "Something like that." They walked in silence for a moment before he added, "Besides, I figure that little one you're carrying deserves a fair shot at life, same as anyone." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to Mariah's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but not before Yates noticed. "I've upset you," he said, concerned. "No," she assured him, touching his arm briefly. "It's just, not everyone sees it that way." The baby's father certainly hadn't. Thomas Beaumont had been charming, wealthy, and utterly ruthless when he discovered his mistress was with child. The memory of his cold eyes as he'd offered her money for the problem to disappear still haunted her. Yates seemed to sense her darkening thoughts. "How about some ice cream?" "Henderson got in a new hand-cranked ice cream maker last month. Makes the best vanilla this side of the Mississippi." Mariah couldn't help but smile at his transparent attempt to cheer her up. "Lead the way, Mr. Holloway." The days turned into weeks, and June gave way to July. The desert heat intensified, making Mariah grateful for the relative coolness of the general store. Her belly grew rounder, and the baby became more active, especially in the evenings when she sat on Mrs. Parker's porch with the other boarders, listening to Mr. Simmons play his harmonica while the sun set behind the distant mountains. Yates continued his daily visits to the store, and their Sunday walks became a tradition, sometimes extending to dinner at the small cafe run by a Chinese family at the edge of town. He never pressed her about her past, and she returned the favor, though curiosity sometimes gnawed at her. Who had Yates Holloway been before Copper Creek? What had driven him to this dusty corner of the Arizona Territory? On a particularly scorching afternoon in late July, the store was empty of customers. Mariah sat behind the counter, fanning herself listlessly, when Yates appeared in the doorway, looking unusually serious. "Mr. Henderson around?" he asked, glancing toward the back room. "Gone to Phoenix for supplies," Mariah replied. "Won't be back until tomorrow. Is something wrong?" Yates approached the counter, placing his hat beside the penny candy jar. Got word that some cattle rustlers might be heading this way. Marshals organizing men to keep watch tonight." A flicker of fear passed through Mariah. "Is it dangerous?" "Probably nothing," Yates assured her, though something in his eyes belied his casual tone. "But I wanted to make sure you know to stay inside tonight. Keep doors and windows locked." Mariah nodded, one hand protectively covering her belly. "I will." Yates hesitated, then reached across the counter to briefly cover her hand with his own. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "Don't worry. This town takes care of its own." The simple statement warmed something deep inside Mariah. After months of feeling like an outsider everywhere she went, the idea that she might belong somewhere, that she might be worth protecting, was almost overwhelming. "That includes you," she said softly. "Be careful tonight." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Yes, madam." He retrieved his hat and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Mariah." "Yes. If anything happens, anything at all, you go to Mrs. Parker's root cellar. It's the safest place in town." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Mariah with a sense of foreboding that lasted through the rest of the quiet afternoon. That night, sleep eluded her. The town was eerily silent, the usual sounds of revelry from the saloon absent as men took up positions to defend their community. Mariah sat by her window, a small oil lamp turned low, watching the deserted main street below. Her baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. "SHH," she whispered, rubbing soothing circles on her belly. "Everything will be fine." Around midnight, the crack of gunfire shattered the silence. Mariah started, her heart racing as more shots followed. From her vantage point, she could see figures moving in the shadows, the occasional muzzle flash illuminating the night. Men's shouts carried on the still air, though she couldn't make out the words. Following Yates's instructions, Mariah quickly dressed, grabbed her shawl, and made her way downstairs to where Mrs. Parker was already herding the other boarders toward the root cellar behind the house. "Quickly now," the older woman urged, remarkably calm despite the chaos. "Simmons, bring that lantern. Martha, help me with these preserves. Might as well have something to eat if we're to be down there a while." The root cellar was cool and smelled of earth and onions. Mrs. Parker arranged them on benches along the walls, passed around blankets, and even produced a bottle of whiskey for medicinal purposes only. Outside, the gunfire continued, though it seemed to be moving away from town. "Rustlers tried to hit the livery, Mr. Simmons explained, having spoken briefly with one of the men on watch before joining them. Yates and the marshal caught him in the act. Mariah's stomach clenched at the mention of Yates. "Is everyone all right?" Simmons shrugged. "Don't rightly know yet." Sounded like they were chasing him out toward the creek. The hours crawled by. Mrs. Parker dozed against the wall, and Mr. Jenkins began to snore softly, but Mariah remained wide awake, ears straining for any sound from above. The baby seemed to share her restlessness, turning and kicking with unusual vigor. "Easy there, little one," she whispered. "Your mama's worried enough as it is." Just before dawn, footsteps approached the cellar doors. Everyone tensed, the men reaching for whatever makeshift weapons they had brought along. The doors creaked open, and a shaft of gray morning light spilled down the steps. "All clear," called a familiar voice. "Rustlers are gone." Relief flooded through Mariah at the sound of Yates's voice. As the boarders filed out of the cellar, she hung back, suddenly uncertain. When she finally emerged into the pale morning light, she found Yates waiting, his face streaked with dirt and what looked like blood. "You're hurt," she gasped, reaching toward a cut above his eye. He caught her hand gently. "It's nothing, but we should get Doc Miller to check on you, make sure all this excitement hasn't caused any problems." "I'm fine," she insisted, though she allowed him to lead her toward the doctor's office. "What happened?" "Mr. Simmons said there were rustlers." Yates nodded grimly. "4 of them tried to steal Henderson's new shipment of horses. We managed to run them off, but—" He hesitated. "What is it?" Mariah pressed, sensing there was more he wasn't telling her. "I recognized one of them," Yates admitted. "Clay Donahue. We rode together years back before." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Doesn't matter. They're gone now, and the marshal's got a posse tracking them to make sure they keep going." There was something in his voice, a tension, a wariness that made Mariah study his face more closely. "You're not telling me everything." Yates sighed, stopping in the middle of the street. The town was coming back to life around them, people emerging to assess any damage from the night's excitement. "Clay's not the type to give up easily," he said finally, "and he recognized me too. Called me by name." "Is that bad?" Yates ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in dusty spikes. "Could be. There are people who might pay good money to know where I am." He met her eyes directly. "I've got a past too, Mariah, not one I'm proud of." Before she could respond, pain lanced through her abdomen, sharp and insistent, unlike anything she'd felt before. She gasped, doubling over. "Mariah!" Yates's voice seemed to come from far away. "The baby," she managed to say through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong." Yates didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he lifted her into his arms and strode quickly toward the doctor's office, his face set in lines of determination. "Hang on," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you, both of you." As another contraction gripped her, Mariah clung to him, praying that whatever force had brought this unlikely protector into her life wouldn't take him away just when she needed him most. Dr. Miller's diagnosis was swift and to the point. "The baby's coming early." "Stress can do that, and I'd say a night of gunfire qualifies as stressful." He patted Mariah's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry. 7.5 months is early, but not dangerously so. I've delivered plenty of healthy babies at this stage." Yates paced the small waiting room while Mrs. Parker sat with Mariah through the initial stages of labor. As the contractions intensified, Mariah found herself wishing for her mother, who had died when she was just 16, leaving her at the mercy of an indifferent father who had been all too happy to marry her off to the first wealthy suitor who showed interest. "You're doing wonderfully, Mrs. Parker encouraged, wiping Mariah's forehead with a cool cloth. "First babies often take their time, but yours seems eager to meet the world." Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. The sun climbed high in the sky, then began its descent. Dr. Miller checked on her progress periodically, his expression growing more concerned as evening approached. "The baby's positioned awkwardly," he explained to Mrs. Parker in hushed tones that Mariah could still hear. "If it doesn't turn soon, we may have complications." Fear clutched at Mariah's heart. After everything she'd endured to protect this child, the thought of losing it now was unbearable. "Yates," she whispered during a brief respite between contractions. "I need to see Yates." Mrs. Parker looked startled. "That's hardly proper, dear. A man has no place in a birthing room." "Please," Mariah insisted, gripping the older woman's hand. "Just for a moment." Perhaps seeing the desperation in her eyes, Mrs. Parker relented. Moments later, Yates entered hesitantly, his usually confident stride reduced to an awkward shuffle. His hat was crushed between his hands, and his eyes widened at the sight of Mariah's pale, sweat-soaked face. "You asked for me," he said, remaining near the door as if ready to flee. "If something happens to me," Mariah began, her voice weak but determined, "I need you to promise the baby won't go to an orphanage." Yates stepped closer, alarm written across his features. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me," she insisted as another contraction began to build. Promise you'll find a good home with people who will love." Her words dissolved into a cry of pain. Yates moved to her side, taking her hand in his calloused one. "I promise," he said fiercely, "but you're going to be fine. You're the strongest person I know, Mariah Dixon." She clung to his hand through the contraction, drawing strength from his steady presence. When it passed, she looked up into his worried face and found herself saying words she hadn't planned. "My name isn't Dixon, it's Beaumont, Mariah Beaumont." She swallowed hard. "I was married, in Chicago." Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes. "And the baby's father, my husband," she confirmed. "He didn't want children, said they would interfere with his political ambitions." Another contraction was building. She could feel it gathering force. "When I refused to get rid of it, he locked me in our bedroom, said he would have me committed to an asylum after I miscarried, claim hysteria." Yates's expression darkened with anger. "How did you get away?" "Our housekeeper helped me." Mariah broke off with a gasp as the strongest contraction yet tore through her. "She had a sister in St. Louis. I was trying to reach her when my money ran out." "Mrs. Parker, I need you back in here," Dr. Miller called from the doorway. "And Mr. Holloway, I must insist you wait outside. Things are progressing quickly now." Yates squeezed Mariah's hand one more time. "You fight," he told her, his voice low and intense. "You fight for yourself and that baby. I'll be right outside." The next hours were a haze of pain and effort. The baby remained stubbornly positioned wrong, and Mariah's strength was fading. As midnight approached, Dr. Miller's instructions took on a desperate edge. "Push, Mariah, with everything you have." She summoned her last reserves of energy, thinking of all she had endured to bring this child safely into the world. Thomas's betrayal, the months of hiding and running, the constant fear of being found, none of it would be in vain. And now there was Yates, waiting just beyond the door, a man who had shown her more kindness in a few weeks than her husband had in 2 years of marriage. With a final, tremendous effort, Mariah pushed. The room filled with the thin, angry wail of a newborn. "A girl," Dr. Miller announced, his voice thick with relief. "Small, but she's got a healthy set of lungs on her." Tears streamed down Mariah's face as the doctor placed the tiny, squirming bundle on her chest. Her daughter, impossibly perfect with a shock of dark hair, and a red, outraged face blinked up at her with unfocused eyes. "Hello, little one," Mariah whispered, running a trembling finger over the baby's cheek. "We made it." Mrs. Parker, wiping tears from her own eyes, patted Mariah's shoulder. "She's beautiful. Have you thought of a name?" Mariah nodded slowly, gazing down at her daughter. "Hope. Her name is Hope." After the doctor had examined both mother and child and pronounced them healthy despite the early arrival, Mrs. Parker went to the waiting room to give Yates the news. He appeared in the doorway moments later, hat still clutched in his hands, his face a mixture of relief and wonder. "A girl," Mariah said softly, cradling the now sleeping infant. "Would you like to meet her?" Yates approached the bed with the same caution he might show a skittish colt. When he gazed down at the tiny face nestled against Mariah's breast, something in his expression shifted, softened. "She's perfect," he murmured. "Her name is Hope," Mariah told him. "Hope for a better future than her past." Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "A fine name." He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said before. You're safe here, Mariah, both of you." The sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you." Dr. Miller insisted that Mariah and the baby remain at his office for at least 2 days to recover. Yates visited multiple times each day, bringing small gifts, a tiny knitted cap from Mrs. Henderson, a soft blanket from Mrs. Parker, wooden blocks he had apparently carved himself during the night watches. On the 3rd morning, as Mariah prepared to return to Mrs. Parker's boarding house with her daughter, Yates arrived with his wagon. "Thought you might prefer not to walk," he explained, helping her carefully up onto the seat with Hope bundled securely in her arms. As they rode slowly through town, several people called out congratulations or stopped to admire the new arrival. Mariah was struck by how quickly she had become part of this community, not as an outsider to be shunned, but as one of their own. "People here are kind," she observed as they passed the general store where Mr. Henderson was sweeping the porch. He waved cheerfully, calling out that her job would be waiting whenever she was ready. "Folks look out for each other," Yates agreed. "It's how we survive out here." "And you?" Mariah asked, gathering her courage. "What made you choose Copper Creek?" Yates was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. "Was riding with a rough crowd for a while after the war. Did things I'm not proud of." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction. "Nothing as bad as some, but bad enough. Then one night we were planning to rob a stage carrying mine payroll. I found out later that Clay and the others intended to kill the passengers, no witnesses." He took a deep breath. "I couldn't be part of that, so I warned the stage company, then rode out before Clay and the boys knew what happened. Been moving around ever since, trying to stay ahead of them. Ended up here about 2 years ago." "And now they've found you," Mariah said softly, understanding his concern the night of the attempted rustling. Yates nodded grimly. "Clay saw me, means others might come looking. Will you leave?" The thought sent a pang through Mariah's heart that surprised her with its intensity. "Been thinking on it," he admitted. "But now—" His eyes drifted to Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Don't seem right to leave you two without protection." They had reached Mrs. Parker's house. Yates helped Mariah down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure around her waist. For a moment they stood close, Hope cradled between them. "We'll be all right," Mariah assured him, though the thought of him leaving made her chest ache. "You've done more than enough already." Yates shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. "I made a promise to keep you both safe. I aim to keep it." In the days that followed, Mariah settled into the exhausting but joyful routine of caring for a newborn. Hope thrived despite her early arrival, gaining weight and growing more alert by the day. Mrs. Parker proved to be an invaluable help, offering advice and occasionally taking the baby so Mariah could rest. True to his word, Yates remained in Copper Creek, though he took to carrying his revolver openly and seemed more watchful when in town. He visited daily, often bringing small necessities or simply sitting with Mariah on the porch swing as she nursed Hope, talking of inconsequential things as the summer heat gradually began to ease into autumn. On a particularly pleasant evening in late August, as golden light spilled across the porch and cicadas sang in the nearby trees, Yates broached a subject that had clearly been on his mind. "Been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "The room above the stable isn't really fitting for a lady and a baby. But I've been saving up, and there's a small house at the edge of town that's come up for sale. 2 rooms and a kitchen, with a good well and space for a garden." Mariah looked up from Hope's peaceful face. "That sounds lovely." "Thing is," Yates continued, staring out at the street rather than meeting her eyes, "I could use some help with the payments. Thought maybe you might consider an arrangement. You could live there with Hope and I'd take the small room off the kitchen. Sort of a boarding situation." Mariah studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. And what would people say about such an arrangement? Yates finally turned to face her, his expression serious. "People will talk no matter what we do, but I respect you too much to suggest anything improper." He hesitated, then added softly, "Though I won't pretend I don't care for you both more than is probably wise." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Mariah's chest. Over the past months, Yates had become more than just her rescuer or friend. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the gentleness with which he handled Hope all had combined to create feelings she had been afraid to examine too closely. "I care for you too," she admitted, looking down at Hope to avoid his eyes. "But my situation is complicated. Legally, I'm still married to Thomas, and if he ever found me—" "He won't," Yates said with quiet determination. "And if he does, he'll have to go through me to get to you or Hope." The protective fierceness in his voice made Mariah look up. In his eyes, she saw not just the affection she had come to rely on, but something deeper, a devotion that both thrilled and terrified her. "I can't ask you to take on my problems," she said. "You didn't ask. I'm offering." Yates reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "I ain't rich, Mariah. Can't give you fancy dresses or jewels or any of the things you probably had back in Chicago, but everything I have is yours if you want it." The simple declaration brought tears to her eyes. In that moment, all the wealth Thomas had flaunted seemed hollow compared to what this cowboy was offering: safety, respect, and a love that asked for nothing in return. "I'd like to see this house," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. Yates's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Tomorrow," he promised. "First thing." The small house was indeed perfect, a modest wooden structure with a covered porch and sturdy walls that Yates assured her would keep out the winter cold. The previous owner had planted a small orchard of apple and peach trees, and a stream ran near the back of the property, providing water for the garden plot. "The roof needs some work," Yates pointed out as he showed her around. "And the kitchen stove is old, but it draws well. Thought we might paint the walls, if you like. Brighten things up a bit." Mariah stood in the center of what would be the main room, imagining it with curtains at the windows and a rug on the floor. Hope, cradled in her arms, gazed around with wide, curious eyes as if approving their potential new home. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. "But I don't want to be a charity case, Yates. If we do this, I need to contribute my share." He nodded, respecting her pride. "Henderson says your job is still there whenever you're ready. And I was thinking, with the orchard, you might make preserves to sell. Mrs. Parker says your apple butter is the best she's tasted." The thought of having her own business, however small, appealed to Mariah. In Chicago, Thomas had controlled every aspect of her life, including the household finances. The independence Yates was offering was as precious as his protection. "When could we move in?" she asked, her decision made. The smile that lit his face was worth any risk. "I'll talk to the bank today." They moved into the house in early September, just as the first hints of autumn began to color the landscape. The town had rallied around them, helping with repairs and providing housewarming gifts that transformed the simple structure into a home. Mrs. Parker donated curtains, Mr. Henderson contributed a rocking chair, and even gruff Dr. Miller appeared with a cradle he claimed had been gathering dust in his storeroom. True to his word, Yates took the small room off the kitchen, maintaining a respectful distance that both frustrated and relieved Mariah. They settled into a comfortable routine, Yates leaving early for the stables, Mariah caring for Hope, and when the baby napped, working on the preserves that had quickly gained popularity in town. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains while Hope cooed and gurgled between them. Sometimes they talked of their pasts, Yates of his childhood on a small farm in Kentucky, his service in the war, the restless years that followed. Mariah of her sheltered upbringing, her father's business failures that had led to her marriage to Thomas, the gradual realization that her husband valued appearance over substance. Other evenings they simply sat in companionable silence, the unspoken feelings between them growing stronger with each passing day. October brought cooler temperatures and news that the marshal had word of Clay Donahue and his gang operating near Tucson. Yates became more vigilant, checking and rechecking the locks on the doors and windows each night before retiring to his room. "Maybe they've forgotten about you," Mariah suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Yates shook his head, his expression grim. "Clay doesn't forget and he doesn't forgive, especially betrayal. What will you do if they come?" He met her eyes steadily. "Whatever I have to." The weeks passed without incident, and gradually Yates relaxed his vigilance. Hope thrived, growing plumper and more animated by the day. Her first real smile directed at Yates as he sang a silly cowboy song while bouncing her on his knee brought tears to Mariah's eyes. "She loves you," Mariah said softly, watching the tenderness with which Yates handled her daughter. "And I love her," he replied simply, before adding in a quieter voice, "both of you." It was the first time he had said the words directly, though his actions had spoken them for months. Mariah's heart raced as she met his gaze across the room. "Yates!" A sudden pounding at the door interrupted her. Yates was on his feet instantly, handing Hope to Mariah and reaching for the rifle he kept near the fireplace. "Who's there?" he called, positioning himself between the door and Mariah. "Telegram for Mariah Beaumont," came the reply. "From Chicago." Mariah felt the blood drain from her face. Only one person in Chicago knew her whereabouts: Anna, the housekeeper who had helped her escape. And Anna would only send a telegram in the direst emergency. Yates glanced back at her, questioning. At her nod, he cautiously opened the door, keeping the rifle visible. The telegraph operator, a young man named Timothy, stood on the porch, a yellow paper in his hand. "Mrs. Parker said I'd find Mrs. Beaumont here," he explained nervously, eyes on the rifle. "Came in about an hour ago." Yates took the telegram, thanked Timothy, and closed the door. For a long moment he stood with the paper in his hand, as if reluctant to deliver potentially bad news. "Whatever it is, I need to know," Mariah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Yates crossed the room and handed her the telegram. With trembling fingers, Mariah unfolded it, Hope secure in the crook of her arm. "Thomas knows stop left Chicago 3 days ago stop heading west with private detective stop. Be careful stop." Anna, the words blurred as tears filled Mariah's eyes. Her worst fear realized Thomas had found her trail, and knowing him, he would not stop until he had reclaimed what he considered his property. "He's coming," she whispered, the paper crumpling in her fist. "He'll take Hope." Yates was beside her in an instant, one arm around her shoulders, the other gently supporting Hope as Mariah's body began to shake with suppressed sobs. "No, he won't," Yates said, his voice hard as iron. "I won't let him." Mariah looked up into his face, seeing the determination there. "You don't know Thomas. He has money, influence. He'll bring the law down on us. Let him try." Yates took the telegram from her trembling hand, reading it quickly. 3 days ago, that gives us time. We could leave, head south to Mexico." "Running again," Mariah said bitterly. "That's been my life for so long." Yates was quiet for a moment, then said slowly, "There might be another way if you were married to someone else." Mariah stared at him, hope and doubt warring in her chest. "What are you saying? Marry me," Yates said simply. "Not just as an arrangement. As my wife, truly. I love you, Mariah. Have almost from the first moment I saw you, standing in that stable doorway looking like you'd been through hell but still fighting. I love Hope like she was my own, and I swear I'll protect you both with my last breath." The raw emotion in his voice stole Mariah's breath. In that moment, she realized that what she felt for Yates had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. Somewhere along the way, through his quiet strength and unwavering support, She had fallen in love with this complicated, honorable man. "But I'm still legally married," she reminded him, even as her heart soared at his declaration. "According to the law here, if a spouse abandons you for over a year, you can file for divorce on grounds of desertion," Yates explained. "Reverend Walsh told me, said it happens fairly often out here." "And you've been discussing this with the Reverend?" Despite the gravity of their situation, Mariah found herself smiling slightly. Yates had the grace to look embarrassed. Might have asked some hypothetical questions a while back. Hope stirred in Mariah's arms, making small fussing noises. She looked down at her daughter, then back up at the man who had become their protector, their provider, their family in all but name. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll marry you, Yates Holloway, not just to thwart Thomas, but because I love you too." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He leaned forward and, for the first time, pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet firm, a promise of protection, passion, and partnership all in one. When they parted, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "We'll go to the county seat tomorrow, file the papers, and see the judge. By the time your husband arrives, it'll be too late." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Yates had the wagon ready before sunrise, helping Mariah and Hope in before climbing up beside them. They had decided to bring Hope rather than leave her with Mrs. Parker. Mariah was unwilling to be separated from her daughter with the threat of Thomas looming. The county seat was a full day's journey over rough terrain. Yates had packed provisions and blankets, anticipating that they might need to spend the night before returning. As they traveled, Mariah found herself watching the man beside her, marveling at how fate had brought them together. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, catching her gaze. "That 6 months ago I never could have imagined this," she replied honestly. "I was so afraid, so alone, and now—" "And now," he prompted when she trailed off. "Now I have hope again, because of you." She smiled, glancing down at her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, both literally and figuratively. Yates reached over to squeeze her hand, his eyes on the road ahead. "We'll get through this, Mariah, together." They reached the county seat by mid-afternoon, a town considerably larger than Copper Creek, with a proper courthouse and several lawyers' offices along the main street. Yates helped Mariah down from the wagon, then gathered their papers. Mariah's marriage certificate to Thomas, which she had kept hidden in her satchel through all her travels, and affidavits from Mrs. Parker and Dr. Miller testifying to her residence in Arizona Territory for the past several months. The county clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, reviewed their paperwork with methodical care. "Everything seems in order," he said finally. "Though cases involving Eastern marriages can be complicated, Judge Thornton handles these matters. He'll be in his chambers until 4 o'clock. The judge, a portly, white-haired man with shrewd eyes, listened to their story with surprising patience, occasionally bouncing Hope on his knee when she became fussy. When Mariah explained about Thomas's threats regarding the baby and her fear for Hope's safety, something hardened in the older man's expression. "I've seen too many cases where children become pawns in adult games," he said, handing Hope back to Mariah. "The law is clear about abandonment, Mrs. Beaumont. Your husband left you without support for over a year, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mariah confirmed. "I left our home in April of last year after he threatened to have me committed. I haven't seen or heard from him since, until this telegram indicating he's now looking for me." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And you wish to marry Mr. Holloway here?" "Yes, sir," Yates answered, standing straighter under the judge's scrutiny. "I love Mariah and her daughter, want to give them my name and protection." Judge Thornton studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. The law allows me some discretion in these matters, particularly where the welfare of a child is concerned. He reached for his pen. I'm granting your petition for divorce on grounds of abandonment, Mrs. Beaumont. The decree will be effective immediately. Relief washed over Mariah like a wave. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, the judge cautioned. If your former husband contests this ruling, you may face further legal battles, and if he's as influential as you suggest, he may have friends in high places. We understand the risk, Yates said, his hand finding Mariah's. But we're prepared to face it together. The judge's stern expression softened slightly. Then perhaps you'd like me to perform another service today, save you the trouble of finding the justice of the peace. It took Mariah a moment to understand his meaning. You would marry us. Now. Unless you'd prefer to wait. There was a twinkle in the old man's eye now. Yates looked at Mariah questioningly. They had planned to find the justice of the peace the next morning, but the judge's offer would save them time and strengthen their position if Thomas arrived sooner than expected. I would be honored, Mariah said, her heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and joy. Though I'm hardly dressed for a wedding, the judge waved away her concern. In my experience, it's not the finery that makes a marriage, but the hearts of those entering into it. He rang a small bell on his desk, summoning his clerk. We'll need 2 witnesses. Find Mrs. Thornton if you would. She's at the milliner's, and perhaps one of the deputies. Within the hour, Mariah found herself standing before the judge's desk, Hope cradled in one arm, her other hand clasped firmly in Yates's. Mrs. Thornton, a kindly woman who had immediately taken to Hope, stood as one witness, while a young deputy named Collins served as the other. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When Judge Thornton pronounced them husband and wife, Yates leaned down to place a gentle kiss on Mariah's lips, their second kiss, and the first as a married couple. Hope, as if sensing the significance of the moment, chose that exact time to let out a delighted gurgle. I believe your daughter approves, Mrs. Thornton laughed, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. Our daughter, Yates corrected, looking at Mariah with such love that it brought tears to her eyes. If you'll have me as her father. Nothing would make me happier, Mariah whispered. They spent the night at the town's small hotel, Yates insisting on paying for the best room available for our wedding night. He'd said with a shy smile that made Mariah's heart flip in her chest. Though they had lived under the same roof for weeks, this was the first time they had truly been alone together as husband and wife. After Hope was settled in a drawer lined with blankets that served as a makeshift cradle, Mariah found herself suddenly nervous. Yates seemed to sense her unease. We don't have to rush anything, he said softly, sitting beside her on the edge of the bed. I meant what I said before. I respect you too much to ever ask for something you're not ready to give. Mariah reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. It's not that. It's just, with Thomas it was never. She struggled to find the words. It was never about love or even affection. It was a duty and not a pleasant one. Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes, followed by a flash of anger that she knew was directed not at her, but at the man who had treated her as a possession rather than a partner. It won't be like that between us, he promised, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. Not ever. Whatever happens between us will be because we both want it, when we both want it. The tenderness in his voice, the patience in his eyes, it was so different from anything she had known in her previous marriage. Mariah felt something within her soften, a knot of fear and tension beginning to unravel. I do want it, she admitted quietly. I want you, I'm just scared, he finished for her. I know, and that's all right. With infinite gentleness, Yates gathered her into his arms, simply holding her close. They sat that way for a long time, her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Gradually, Mariah's nervousness eased, replaced by a warm, comfortable feeling of rightness. When she tilted her face up to his, he kissed her slowly, thoroughly, with a reverence that made her feel both cherished and desired. What followed was a discovery of each other, unhurried and tender, worlds away from the cold, mechanical encounters of her first marriage. In Yates's arms, Mariah found not just physical pleasure, but a deep emotional connection that had been missing from her life for too long. As they lay together afterward, her head pillowed on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, she felt truly at peace for the first time in years. "I love you," she whispered into the darkened room, his arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Mariah Holloway." The new name sent a thrill through her. No longer Beaumont with all its painful associations. She was Mariah Holloway, now wife, mother, and her own woman. They returned to Copper Creek the next day, the signed marriage certificate and divorce decree safely tucked away in Mariah's satchel. News of their marriage spread quickly through the small town, met with general approval and a few knowing smiles from those, like Mrs. Parker, who had watched their relationship blossom over the months. Yates moved his belongings from the small room off the kitchen to the main bedroom, and their little house truly became a home. Despite the shadow of Thomas's possible arrival hanging over them, they found joy in their new life together, Yates teaching Hope to clap her hands, Mariah expanding her preserves business to include jellies and pickles, both of them working in the garden or sitting on the porch in the evenings, planning for a future they hoped would be theirs to shape. November brought colder weather and the first dusting of snow to the mountains visible from their front porch. Hope celebrated her 5-month birthday with new accomplishments rolling over, grabbing for toys, and developing a hearty laugh that became Yates's favorite sound in the world. "She's growing so fast," Mariah observed one evening as they watched Hope batting at a wooden mobile Yates had carved for her. "Before we know it, she'll be walking and talking," Yates agreed, his arm around Mariah's shoulders. "Maybe have a little brother or sister to play with someday." The casual mention of more children made Mariah's heart skip. The thought of having a child with Yates, a child born of love rather than obligation, filled her with a longing she hadn't expected. "I'd like that," she admitted, leaning into his embrace. "Though perhaps we should wait until this business with Thomas is resolved." Yates nodded, his expression growing serious. "Been thinking about that. It's been nearly 3 weeks since Anna's telegram. Either he's moving slower than expected, or he's lost our trail," Mariah finished hopefully. "Maybe." But Yates didn't sound convinced. "Just seems strange we haven't heard anything more." As if summoned by their conversation, a knock came at the door. Yates was immediately alert, moving Mariah behind him as he approached the entrance, one hand near the revolver at his hip. "Who is it?" he called. "Marshal Davies," came the reply. "Need a word with you and Mrs. Holloway." Yates opened the door to admit the town marshal, a grizzled man in his 50s who rarely made social calls. His expression was grave as he removed his hat, nodding to Mariah. "Evening, madam. Sorry to disturb you at home." "What is it, Marshal?" Yates asked, tension evident in his voice. "Had a telegram from the sheriff over in Silver Springs. Man's been asking questions about a woman matching Mrs. Holloway's description. Traveling with a private detective. Sheriff says he's flashing money around, offering rewards for information." Mariah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Thomas didn't give that name," the marshal continued. "Called himself James Wilson, but from what you've told me, sounds like it could be your former husband." Yates's jaw tightened. "How far is Silver Springs?" "About 60 miles east. 2 days' ride if the weather holds." "So we have some time," Yates said, his mind clearly working through options. The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Man sent telegrams to several towns in the area, including here, offering $500 for information leading to the whereabouts of his missing wife and child. Claims she's mentally unstable, ran off during a spell of hysteria, exactly as Thomas had threatened. Mariah felt sick." "That's a lie," Yates said flatly. "Mariah is my wife now, legally. We have the papers to prove it." "I believe you," Marshal Davies assured him. "But $500 is a lot of money. People talk, especially when there's that kind of reward involved." "Has anyone from Copper Creek responded to the telegram?" Mariah asked, dreading the answer. The marshal hesitated. "Timothy says he hasn't sent any replies. But I can't speak for everyone who might have seen the notice." Yates ran a hand through his hair, his expression grim. "What do you suggest, Marshal? Honestly, if it were me, I'd consider moving on, at least until this blows over. Man can't keep up the search forever." "No," Mariah said firmly, surprising both men. "I'm tired of running. This is our home now, Hope's home. I won't let Thomas drive us away." Yates crossed to her side, kneeling next to her chair. "Are you sure? I'll take you anywhere you want to go if you think it's safer." Mariah took his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I'm sure. We have the law on our side now. The divorce is legal. Our marriage is legal, and Hope is your daughter in every way that matters." Yates searched her face, then nodded slowly. "All right, we stay and face this together." He looked up at the marshal. "We'd appreciate it if you'd keep an eye out, though. Thomas Beaumont is not a man who takes disappointment well." "I'll do what I can," Davies promised. "And for what it's worth, the people of this town think highly of you both." Don't imagine many would be swayed by this reward business. After the marshal left, Yates double-checked the locks and added extra wood to the fire. Mariah sat in the rocking chair, Hope asleep in her arms, her mind racing with possibilities. How would Thomas react when he discovered she had divorced him and remarried? Would he accept defeat and return to Chicago, or would his pride drive him to more desperate measures? "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I should have burned that marriage certificate before I left Chicago," she replied with a wry smile, "made it harder for him to prove anything." Yates chuckled despite the tension. "That's my girl, always thinking." "I'm afraid, Yates," she admitted after a moment. "Not for myself, but for Hope, and for you. Thomas is vindictive. He won't just let this go." "Let him come," Yates said, his voice hard. "I've faced worse than some city dandy with wounded pride." But as they prepared for bed that night, Mariah couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful life was about to be shattered. She held Hope a little longer than usual, before placing her in the cradle, whispering promises of protection into her daughter's tiny ear. Yates watched from the doorway, his heart aching at the sight. Whatever came, he would defend this family with everything he had. The thought of anyone trying to take Mariah or Hope from him awakened a fierce protectiveness that surprised even him. He had been many things in his life: soldier, drifter, outlaw, but never before had he been a husband and father. Now that he would die before relinquishing those roles. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Yates left early for the stables, promising to return by midday. Mariah busied herself with household tasks, trying to maintain normalcy despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She was feeding Hope when a knock came at the door, 3 sharp raps that made her freeze. Setting Hope in her cradle, Mariah approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Telegram for Mrs. Holloway," came the reply. Relief flooded through her. "Just Timothy with a message." She opened the door to find the young telegraph operator shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway. Got this for you just now." He handed her the yellow paper, then added in a rush, "Also, there's a man at the office asking questions about newcomers to town. Well-dressed fellow with a city accent. Thought you should know." Mariah's heart stuttered. "Thank you, Timothy. Did you tell him anything?" The boy shook his head emphatically. "No, madam. Just said we get folks passing through all the time, but I don't keep track of who stays and who goes." He lowered his voice. "Marshal Davies warned us all about him last night." "You're a good boy," Mariah said, pressing a coin into his hand. "Could you do one more thing for me? Find Yates at the stables. Tell him our visitor has arrived." Timothy nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam. Right away." As he hurried off, Mariah closed and locked the door, then opened the telegram with trembling fingers. "He knows stop left Silver Springs yesterday. Stop armed. Stop be careful. Stop Walsh. Reverend Walsh." How he had gotten this information, Mariah didn't know, but she was grateful for the warning. Thomas was armed. That was unlike him. He had always considered firearms beneath a gentleman. But desperation changed people, as she well knew. Moving quickly, Mariah gathered essentials for Hope: diapers, a spare gown, a bottle of milk. She was just placing these items in a small bag when she heard another knock, more forceful this time. "Mariah, it's Yates. Open up." She rushed to the door, relief washing over her as she saw her husband standing there, face grim, Timothy hovering behind him. "He's here," she said as Yates stepped inside. "In town. Timothy saw him at the telegraph office." Yates nodded, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "I know. Marshal Davies just told me. He's at the hotel, registered as James Wilson." He turned to the boy still standing on their porch. "Thanks, Timothy. You did good. Now go on home and stay there for a while." As Timothy scampered off, Yates closed and locked the door, then moved to the window, scanning the street. No sign of anyone yet, but if he's asking at the telegraph office, won't be long before someone points him this way. "What do we do?" Mariah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady for Hope's sake. Yates turned to face her, his expression resolute. "We face him. Together. With the marshal present and our marriage certificate in hand. Make it clear that you're legally my wife now and Hope is my daughter. And if he doesn't accept that, then he'll answer to me." The quiet determination in Yates's voice sent a shiver down Mariah's spine. "But I'm hoping it won't come to that. Most men, even angry ones, will back down when faced with the law and public opinion." "You don't know Thomas," Mariah said softly. "His pride is everything to him, being publicly bested, especially by a woman. He won't stand for it." Before Yates could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the window. A fine carriage was making its way down the street, unusual enough in Copper Creek to draw curious onlookers. It stopped directly in front of their house. "Is that him?" Yates asked, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. Mariah nodded, her throat tight as she recognized the elegant figure stepping down from the carriage. Thomas Beaumont looked exactly as she remembered: tall, impeccably dressed, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. Beside him was a shorter, rougher-looking man whom she assumed was the private detective. "Stay here," Yates said, moving toward the door. "I'll handle this." "No," Mariah caught his arm. "We face him together, remember? I'm not hiding anymore." For a moment, Yates looked like he might argue, but then he nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Together, then. But stay behind me until we know his intentions." The knock, when it came, was oddly polite, 3 measured raps. Yates opened the door, positioning himself in the entrance so that Mariah and Hope were partially shielded behind him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice deliberately neutral. Thomas Beaumont's eyes narrowed as he took in the man before him. "I'm looking for Mariah Beaumont. I have reason to believe she's here." "There's no one by that name here," Yates replied evenly. "This is the Holloway residence." Thomas's gaze shifted, finding Mariah standing behind Yates with hope in her arms. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Mariah," he said, his voice deceptively gentle. "It's time to come home, my dear. You've been unwell, but the doctors assure me they can help you." "I'm not unwell, Thomas," Mariah replied, moving to stand beside Yates. "And this is my home now, with my husband and my daughter." Thomas's face hardened. "Your husband stands before you, madam. Whatever delusion you're operating under ends now. That child is mine, and you are my wife." "Not anymore," Yates interjected, his voice firm but controlled. "Mariah divorced you on grounds of abandonment. We have the papers signed by a judge. We were legally married 3 weeks ago." For a moment, Thomas looked genuinely stunned. Then his face flushed with anger. "Impossible. I never received notice of any divorce proceedings." "Notice was published in the territorial paper, as required by law," Yates explained. "The judge ruled that your abandonment of Mariah for over a year constituted grounds for immediate dissolution of the marriage." "This is absurd," Thomas sputtered. "Some backwater justice playing at law." "It won't stand up in a real court." "It's legal and binding," came another voice from behind Thomas. Marshal Davies approached the porch, hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Everything in order, Mr. Holloway, Marshal," Yates acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Beaumont here seems to be having trouble understanding the situation." Thomas turned to face the lawman, visibly struggling to regain his composure. "I don't know what lies you've been told, Marshal, but this woman is my wife. She's been mentally unstable since the birth of our child. I've come to take her home where she can receive proper care." "That's not true," Mariah said firmly. "Thomas threatened to have me committed when I refused to get rid of my baby. He locked me in our bedroom. I escaped because I feared for my life and my child's." The marshal's expression remained impassive, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I've known Mrs. Holloway for several months now, found her to be of sound mind and good character. As for the legal matters, I've seen the divorce decree and marriage certificate myself. They appear to be in order." Thomas's face contorted with fury. "This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who I am? My family has connections throughout the country. I could have this entire town wiped off the map with a single telegram." "Maybe in Chicago," the marshal replied calmly. "But out here, we tend to make our own judgments about a person's character, and threatening folks doesn't generally improve our opinion." A small crowd had begun to gather, curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. Mariah recognized Mrs. Parker, Mr. Henderson, and several others who had shown her kindness since her arrival in Copper Creek. Thomas noticed the onlookers and seemed to realize that intimidation would get him nowhere. His expression shifted, becoming conciliatory. "Mariah," he said, his voice softening. "I understand you were frightened. Perhaps I was harsh in my reaction to your condition. But surely you can see that the child needs a proper upbringing with all the advantages I can provide. Come home with me. I'm willing to forgive this lapse in judgment." Before Mariah could respond, Hope began to fuss, squirming in her arms. Yates reached out automatically, taking the baby with practiced ease and settling her against his shoulder, one large hand gently patting her back. The tender gesture was so natural, so paternal, that several of the watching townspeople exchanged approving nods. The sight of another man holding his child seemed to push Thomas past reason. His hand moved to his coat pocket, emerging with a small derringer. "Give me my daughter," he demanded, pointing the gun at Yates. Several gasps came from the crowd. The marshal's hand moved to his own weapon, but Thomas was too close to Yates and Mariah for a safe shot. "Put that away, Beaumont," Yates said quietly, still holding Hope protectively. "You don't want to do this. You have no right to that child," Thomas snarled. "She's a Beaumont, my heir." "She's my daughter," Yates replied, his voice unwavering despite the gun pointed at him. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. I've rocked her to sleep every night. I know what makes her laugh, what comforts her when she cries. Can you say the same?" Something in Yates's words seemed to reach through Thomas's rage. The gun wavered slightly. "The man you hired to find me," Mariah said, seizing the moment. "Did he tell you what happened after I left Chicago? How I walked until my shoes fell apart? How I went hungry so the baby could have milk? Where were you then, Thomas? Where was your concern for your heir when I was sleeping in barns and begging for work?" Thomas's face flushed. "You chose to run away." "You could have had every comfort if I'd gotten rid of my baby," Mariah finished for him. "That was your condition. Well, I chose my child over your money, and I'd make the same choice again." The crowd had grown larger, and murmurs of support for Mariah rippled through the onlookers. Thomas glanced around, seemingly realizing for the first time how isolated he was, one man with a small gun, facing not just Yates and the marshal, but an entire community that had embraced Mariah as one of their own. "This isn't over," he said, lowering the derringer slightly. "I have lawyers. Resources. You can't just steal a man's wife and child and expect no consequences." "She ain't your wife anymore," Yates said, his voice steady. "And Hope ain't your child, not in any way that counts. You gave up that right when you threatened to lock Mariah away and tried to force her to lose the baby." Several angry murmurs came from the crowd at this revelation. In the frontier communities of the West, where children were precious and women often faced hardship with courage, Thomas's actions were viewed with particular disdain. Marshal Davies stepped forward, his hand still on his gun. "I think it's time you moved on, Mr. Beaumont, before things get any more unpleasant." For a tense moment, Thomas stood his ground, the derringer still in his hand. Then, with a look of cold fury, he slipped the gun back into his pocket. "This isn't the end," he said to Mariah. "A backwater divorce won't stand up in a proper court. I'll be back, with the full force of the law behind me." "You do that," the marshal replied evenly. "In the meantime, I suggest you and your associate take the afternoon stage. It leaves in about an hour." Thomas's jaw worked as he struggled with his rage and humiliation. Finally, with a curt nod to the private detective, he turned and strode back to the waiting carriage, his back rigid with wounded pride. As the carriage pulled away, a collective sigh of relief went through the gathered crowd. Yates put his arm around Mariah, Hope still cradled against his shoulder, and led her back inside their home. The marshal followed, closing the door behind them. "He'll be back," Mariah said, sinking into a chair, "with lawyers and court orders." "Maybe," the marshal acknowledged. "But frontier courts tend to favor those who are actually present and contributing to the community. Absentee husbands who abandon their wives don't generally fare well, especially when the wife has remarried and established a stable home. And there's the matter of the threats," Yates added. "We have witnesses who heard him threaten me with a gun. That won't play well for him." Mariah looked up at her husband, standing steady and strong with Hope dozing against his chest. Despite everything, a feeling of profound gratitude washed over her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "Thank you," she said to both men, "for standing with me. Always," Yates replied simply. The marshal tipped his hat. "I'll keep an eye on things until that stage leaves. Don't you worry, Mrs. Holloway. This town protects its own." After he left, Yates sat beside Mariah, Hope still sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Are you all right?" Mariah considered the question. Her heart was still racing, and the fear of Thomas's return lingered like a shadow. But underneath that was a new feeling, a certainty that she was no longer alone in her fight. "I'm better than all right," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "For the first time since I found out I was pregnant, I'm not afraid, not really." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "Good. Because I meant what I said to him. Hope is my daughter now in every way that matters, and you're my wife. Nothing and no one is going to change that. I ain't rich, but I'm yours," he added softly, echoing words he had said to her months before. "Both of you." In that moment, with her husband's arm around her and her daughter sleeping safely between them, Mariah knew that all the wealth Thomas had offered could never compare to the treasure she had found in this simple home at the edge of a dusty frontier town. True to the marshal's prediction, Thomas and his detective left on the afternoon stage. The entire town seemed to breathe easier after their departure, though Yates maintained a watchful eye in the days that followed, half expecting Thomas to return with reinforcements. A week passed, then two, with no word from Chicago. Gradually, life returned to normal. Yates continued his work at the stables. Mariah resumed helping at the general store with Hope in a basket nearby, and their evenings were spent in the quiet contentment of a family secure in their love for one another. Christmas approached, bringing a festive spirit to Copper Creek. The general store displayed candies and toys brought in specially for the holiday, and the ladies of the town organized a decoration committee for the church. Mariah, with her eye for beauty, was quickly enlisted to help, while Yates volunteered to cut and haul evergreen boughs from the nearby mountains on Christmas Eve. A light snow fell, dusting the desert landscape with white. Mariah stood at the window of their home, watching the flakes drift down in the glow of the lantern Yates had hung on the porch. "It's beautiful," she said as he came to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist. He agreed, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Not as beautiful as you, though." Mariah turned in his embrace, smiling up at him. "Flatterer. Just honest." He nodded toward Hope, who was attempting to crawl on a blanket spread before the fire. "Got something for you. Both of you. Wanted to give it to you tonight, just us." Curiosity piqued. Mariah watched as Yates retrieved a small package from the cabinet where he kept his few personal treasures. He handed it to her with an almost shy smile. "It's not much," he warned as she carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a small, leather-bound book. Opening it, Mariah found blank pages, the first of which bore an inscription in Yates's careful handwriting, "For Hope, so she'll always know her story." "Thought we could write in it," Yates explained. "About how we met, how we became a family. So when she's older, she'll understand where she came from, how much she was wanted right from the start." Tears filled Mariah's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "There's something else," Yates said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm. A simple gold band with a tiny pearl nestled in the center glinted in the firelight. "I know we're already married, but you never got a proper ring. It was my mother's. My pa gave it to her when they were courting. She'd want you to have it." Mariah stared at the ring, deeply touched by the sentiment behind it. Yates carefully slipped it onto her finger where it fit as if made for her. "Now it's official," he said with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Holloway." "I love you," Mariah whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "So much." Hope chose that moment to let out a triumphant squeal, having successfully conquered the art of crawling to reach a wooden toy horse Yates had carved for her. They both turned to watch, laughing as she proudly held up her prize. "Come here, little lady," Yates called, scooping her up as she crawled toward him. "Got something to tell you." He settled Hope on his knee, facing Mariah. "Your mama and I were just agreeing that this family could use another little Holloway around here. What do you think? Would you like a brother or sister? Hope babbled enthusiastically, waving her toy horse for emphasis. I think that's a yes, Mariah laughed, her heart so full of love it seemed impossible to contain. What about you? Yates asked, his eyes holding hers. What do you think? Mariah placed her hand over his, their fingers intertwining. I think it's the perfect time to start a new chapter in our story. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Copper Creek in a blanket of white. Inside the small house at the edge of town, a family born of chance, choice, and love celebrated their first Christmas together, the first of many to come. In the years that followed, the Holloways' fears about Thomas Beaumont's return gradually faded. A letter arrived from Anna in the spring, reporting that Thomas had become engaged to the daughter of a prominent Chicago businessman, apparently having decided that a new, more advantageous marriage was preferable to a protracted legal battle over his former wife and child. Hope grew into a bright, adventurous girl with her mother's determination and her father's steady nature. She was joined 2 years later by a brother, Jack, who arrived during a thunderstorm that Yates swore was less dramatic than his son's entrance into the world. 2 years after that came little Emma, completing their family. Copper Creek prospered as the railroad came through, bringing new opportunities and residents. Yates eventually saved enough to buy the livery stables where he had worked, while Mariah's preserves became famous throughout the territory, sold in general stores as far away as Tucson and Phoenix. On warm summer evenings, the family would often sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Hope would beg for stories, especially the one about how her parents met, which became more romantic with each telling. "Tell me again," she would plead, her eyes bright with anticipation. "About how Papa rescued you and me." And Yates would pull his oldest daughter onto his lap, wink at his wife, and begin the tale. Well, it was a hot day in June, and the most beautiful, bravest woman I'd ever seen was standing in the doorway of my stable. Mariah would listen, her heart full, marveling at how the darkest chapter of her life had led to its brightest pages. In the end, Thomas's wealth and position had meant nothing compared to the true riches she had found: love, family, and a home where she truly belonged. "I ain't rich, but I'm yours," Yates had told her that first night at Dr. Miller's office, a lifetime ago. Looking at her family healthy, happy, and safe, Mariah knew she had made the right choice. For in gaining Yates Holloway's love, she had found a treasure beyond price.